All right, welcome back to another episode of the Two Planker Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Schaefer, and today on the show we have Mike Jaquet, the publisher for Freeze Magazine. And Mike, thank you very much for joining the show.
Great to be here.
Yeah. So, we're going to be talking a lot about the past. So, what have you been up to recently?
Recently, I've started a consulting company. I've kind of got involved with the Olympic movement when I was the chief marketing officer of U.S. Ski and Snowboard for 6 years. And when I left there now 4 years ago, started a consulting company that did a lot of what I did there for other national governing bodies. So USA Skateboarding, USA Cycling, USA Hockey, US Speed Skating. I do a lot of sponsorship development for them, and then I also help them with their media rights negotiations as well. So kind of dipping a little bit of a lot of different career path experiences into my own company now, which is great. You know, kind of having my own company, be my own boss. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go back on that, but yeah, it's doing that. And then I also have a partnership with an agency called Dragonfly, which is a company started by Adam Comey and Dave Swanwick, two former pro skiers that we go, obviously way back to the freeze days. And we have an event agency that we do a lot of experiential events and big events, mostly large events. We just finished up the Formula E electric races in Brooklyn, so we managed that whole thing for that company in Brooklyn for their one race in America. So yeah, like I'm busy as I ever would want to be, and got my own company going, and then also have a partnership with another company. So it's been good for me, and actually, to be honest, spending a lot more time skiing and mountain biking, and spending a heck of a lot more time with my three kids. So that works out really well.
Yeah, that sounds like a good setup. I'm definitely glad I could steal an hour of your time in the middle of all that to to
Yeah.
talk about Freeze. So the way we connected is, I could give the background story on this because I haven't said it on the mic yet, but I just got this itch to everybody I interviewed kept on talking about how Freeze magazine was just such a huge influence for them. And I went on New Schoolers and I finally was like, all right, I need to get my hands on some of these things to see what the hell was going on. And I have the scanner app on my phone. I'm like, I got to share this with everybody else. And uh,
Yeah.
and that's kind of where you saw it. I posted on New Schoolers, hey, here's a bunch of copies of Freeze that I had, and you said, hey, let me fill in the rest and let's
Yeah,
do an
that
episode.
got your post got forwarded to me by 4 or 5 different people. So yeah, I mean, everybody kind of, I guess knows where the stash exists. When we stopped publishing Freeze in 2005, it was late. It was the final issue went out the door in I think around October 2005. Um, I actually moved to New York City, and uh, two of the guys that worked for Freeze, Ryan Miller, our marketing director, and then Ryan Slack, who was kind of our marketing intern guy, nicknamed Meat. They stayed at Transworld, and everybody else left, and they kept working at Transworld, and so they sent me through and this stuff has been through about 4 moves, but they sent me everything. They sent me all the boxes of magazines. They sent me the banners from the US Free Skiing Open. They sent me all the merchandise that was left. So they sent it all out to me in New York, and it lived in my basement, and it survived a couple floods. And I have it here with me in Park City as well. So it's super valuable, like to people, not monetarily, but more like emotionally. And that's what, makes me happy, is that people will, I'll get like 2 or 3 emails a year, like, hey, my husband was in the magazine and I want to surprise him for his birthday. or I was in the magazine and I don't have it anymore. Do you happen to have it? And go down to the basement and find it and send it out to them, and just get tons of great feedback, and people are so excited when that little piece of ski history exists. So yeah, I got it all. It's in the basement. And I was happy to fill out your collection. You did really well post 2002, but yeah, I think that
Yeah.
was about a third, the final third. So we had a lot to fill your collection in with.
Yeah, and I'm still scanning them. So I'll definitely include the link to all the digitized copies, but it's got to be a big relief because a lot of people commented that, oh, I was a teenager when I had these and I threw them out, when I moved to college or
Yep.
whatever, and they've
Yep.
been kicking themselves for 20 years. So to unearth them and kind of revisit everything, it's been fun.
Yeah, I'd say the biggest regret that we have the two biggest regrets I have about Freeze Magazine. One, when the end time came, and there was a lot of things going on, and with me and my career, and just it was time for me to move on, and it just devastated me that I wasn't able to hand the reins off to somebody, either the new schoolers guys, or someone in the community, because there was a lot of them that could have really, run with it, and kept it alive, because it still had a lot of stories to tell, and we were a profitable magazine at the end. The ironic part is when we weren't profitable, we were most popular, and when we got profitable, then all of a sudden, they decided to stop publishing it. So my biggest regret is that I wasn't able to pass it on to somebody, because it was time for me to go. But the second biggest regret on everything is that we only have low res files from the magazine. So as crazy, because this is back when we would have to scan slides, and it just took, and computer servers, and everything was, you just didn't have the amount of storage. So we didn't store anything in high res. It's all in low res. So the entire archive really exists in print and not digitally. And that is a challenge. And I'm excited to kind of see where your project ends up, and if that can be a truly digital copy of the archive, which would be great because it doesn't exist right now. It's all in print.
Yeah, and it's dangerous having something that valuable only in print because a couple well placed fires and floods and that basically erases it from history altogether. So
Yeah,
you
I
know
live in the mountains. I know all too well about the fire stuff. So yeah, yeah. So hopefully we can get a digital copy. I think it would be great for the sport and be great for everybody that was ever in the magazine. Which the list was long, and I think it would be awesome.
yeah, definitely. So we're the way we're telling the story, it's very cinematic. It's like a lot of movies. We're starting at the end, and then
Yeah, exactly.
everyone's having to figure out how we got to this point. So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go back
Yep.
to the beginning for you, and then we can really get into like the business side of how Freeze was launched. But from what I
Sure.
understand, you grew up fully surrounded by skiing. Is that true?
Yeah, I grew up in Sun Valley, Idaho. We moved there when I was 7, um, and went to kindergarten with Peekaboo Street, and went to elementary school and high school with Zach and Reggie Christ, and the Lydeckers, and Skip Merrick, and just a bunch of Muffy Davis, just a bunch of people that ended up being on the U.S. ski team, and in Peekaboo's case, gold medalist. But actually made a decision when I was 13 years old to be a cross country skier, and always kept alpine skiing, and the mountain in Sun Valley, Bald Mountain, is just the most ridiculously uh, steep, sustained terrain. Especially on bad old straight ski technology, you certainly get it teaches you how to turn a ski and teaches you how to have an edge. So I always skied, alpine skied, but became a cross country racer and ended up being a pretty good one, 5-time high school All-American, and then went to University of Colorado and skied there on the cross country team for 2 years and was a varsity letterman on the national championship team. But that sophomore year is when I had grown up with Kent Kreitler. He and I were high school classmates, same year. And we moved in together into a house in Boulder at University of Colorado, and we needed a roommate, a fourth roommate, and that became Shane McConkey. And so it was Shane, Kent, and I, and another guy named DJ Hodge, who we also grew up with in Sun Valley. And the four of us just had, I don't know, I'd put that year, the winter of the fall of 90 and the winter of 91. I would put that year up against anybody else's college experience in the history of college experiences. That year was incredible. It was great snow. We did a bunch of really fun trips, but we just, like, every single day, largely fueled by Shane. Every day was just, one after another, amazing day. Everybody was living life to their fullest, and we were, we had this great house with hosting huge parties, and we had a lot of really, really cool friends, and we would all go up in the mountains every chance we could get to ski, and nailed some powder days. Had an epic trip to Alta for a 4-day weekend. So we just, like, that winter was total game changer for me. The rest of my life was never the same. When I knew how fun life could get, it was that year, and really, obviously influenced the whole rest of certainly influenced the eventual creation of Freeze magazine, but really influenced the rest of my life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have the demographic for this podcast a little bit on the younger side, 20s primarily. So
Yep.
could you talk about Shane a little bit? And I guess maybe, I mean, since your lives merged together so closely for the Freeze years, like
Yeah.
where he was from originally and kind of
Mhm.
what he was up to before he met you.
Yeah. Shane grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and he just loved going to Tahoe. And his dad is a very famous skier. There's a McConkey's lift here in Park City that's actually named after Shane's dad, not after Shane. And his dad was a kind of a film skier. He was a Canadian, and he married Shane's mom, and Shane, when he was very, very young, would be going from Santa Cruz to Squaw Valley and skiing, and then got really good in the race program and went to Burke Mountain Academy. And he was just a really, really skinny kid. He had an incredible natural ability in skiing, and he was a GS and slalom specialist. But just didn't make just not big enough, strong enough to make the U.S. ski team. So went to school at University of Colorado to try to be on the ski team, and just never made grades. He just was incredibly smart, but just not really book smart, and had a real kind of tough time managing schoolwork, as did Kent. We were all of us in this house were barely making grades. And Shane just didn't make grades enough to stay on the ski team. And but yeah, like, between, I think, when he got to Burke, and certainly when he got to University of Colorado 2 years later, he was like, really shy, dorky kid, but just hilarious, and and he and I actually shared a room. So we were in a 3-bedroom house and with 4 guys. And so Shane and I shared a room, and yeah, I got to know everything about him. And we had a really, really close relationship. And it's just one of those guys that, like, again, every day he'd wake up, he was trying to do something. He was trying to, like, before the word progression got to skiing, Shane was trying to progress life, right? He wanted to rollerblade down some crazy hill in Boulder. He wanted to jump off a roof, and he wanted to try to get a double back on a trampoline. Just all these things that he kept, like, his goals were, all about trying to have fun, and he really his dream job was to be a stuntman. He kind of realized that in college. He wanted to try to do this pro skier thing, but he really kind of thought he would be able to fall back on being a stuntman. And yeah, he would later become, I don't know what, 6-7 years later, after that fall of 90, winter 91 season, 6-7 years later, he would become arguably the most influential and famous skier of all time, and would crush it for a decade before he passed. Yeah, a lot of people always ask me, like, did Shane know that he was going to be a pro skier, or did Shane have aspirations to be the most famous skier in the world? Nope, not even close. We just kind of never even knew that was a path. But when it all happened, and he did become the most famous and influential skier in the world, it wasn't really ever surprising to me. But again, it was just that path didn't exist before, really Shane and Kent created that path. And, Freeze Magazine was along for the ride in documenting all that. But it was really those 2 guys that kind of, like, and a bunch of others that just decided that they were just gonna, keep going for it, and created a really, really incredible thing for the sport. And I think that was, like, that would be the one thing that I think we didn't realize at the time, that there was a version of skiing that we were into, and a few others that we met were into, like Seth. When we met Seth, he was into it, but not a lot of others, and certainly not the ski industry. The ski industry had no idea that this version of skiing existed and these people existed, and their eye was off the ball with that, and that created a wonderful opportunity for Freeze. Just simply, like, how can I document what's going on with this group of skiers? Because this group of skiers is everything that skiing should be about. That's what we said about documenting.
Yeah, that's a great summary of what was going on. So you were the cross country skier, you had a racer. Was there anyone really into moguls in your group?
It's funny. Shane actually became a mogul skier because of the money. It was the only way you could earn money in skiing. So he did. I remember the very first mogul contest he did. He did the mogul contest on Rosnall GS skis with Derby Flex bindings. So these raised bindings, and they were like 205s, and probably the worst mogul ski ever constructed in the history of time. And he went up to the CU bump off, which was like a club program, and the winning prize was $500, and that's the only reason he entered. He didn't like mogul skiing. None of us loved mogul skiing. We were out bumping a little bit just because we were skiing the whole mountain, but we didn't have a passion for moguls. And Shane just went up there and won $500, and then all of a sudden realized that he could go and to all these mogul contests that had prize money, and beat everybody because he was that good of a skier. I mean, he won a pro mogul contest. The second season he started skiing moguls. So first season he skied moguls, he won a couple amateur contests. Second season he started skiing moguls, he won a pro mogul contest in Copper Mountain, and won like $2,500, and it was like the greatest day of his life. So he was just so talented that he could just drop into really anything and crush it. But yeah, we didn't really have I mean, we all skied moguls because we skied the whole mountain, but nobody that skied competitively until Shane realized you could make money on it. So he went out and made money on it. But then that quickly ended when Kent did the U.S. Extremes, and I think did really well. I want to say he got second or something like that, and won some money there. And Kreitler told Shane, like, because they skied together all the time, we all did. He said you should try this extreme skiing thing out, and when once Shane got into that, then there was no more mogul skiing. But yeah, the dynamic of the group was that Shane and Kent would go do stuff, and then I was a journalism school student, and I had access to all the AV equipment at the journalism school at University of Colorado. So like really good cameras at the time. They all shot VHS, but I had access to camera gear, tripods, editing rooms, unlimited editing room time. So I was the guy that shot everything, and those were the guys that starred in everything, and we would create a best of season movie that would come out the following fall after a year's worth of skiing, and we'd have big parties at our house and set up. Everybody would huddle around a 36-inch square 4x3 television with a VHS tape, and we'd play it. And yeah, those were like, I think when those movies, and again they were 10-12 minute highlight clips of all of us skiing, mostly Shane and Ken, but a bunch of other guys that we hung out with that are all just college students, not pro skiers. But when those became really, really popular, and people were just like wanted to continue to watch them and these were our movies, and everybody kept telling us like, this is better than Warren Miller, this is better than anything out there. I think that's probably when we started realizing that there was also something going on as well, that what we were doing and how we were skiing the mountain was different than everybody, and people were getting excited about seeing it. It was rare that we kind of kept to ourselves, so it was kind of rare that you get to ski with those guys just on a regular random weekend. So being able to see it on VHS tape was something unique and special.
Yeah. So obviously you lived through this era, and this was several years before I was even born. So forgive me if I'm
Yeah.
mangling up the timeline. So when you say the extreme skiing, was this when skiing was being inspired by snowboarding, or was this even before snowboarding took off in a big way? Like was skiing already going towards the extreme route before it really exploded with terrain parks and all of that?
Yeah, so there wasn't any terrain parks on any mountains in the mid 90s. There are a couple of them that popped up here and there, but they weren't terrain parks. They were pieces of terrain, and they were called snowboard parks. They weren't called terrain parks. They're called snowboard parks. And then as we got to the late 90s, that's when more and more of them started to pop up, and then most of the big resorts had them. But again, they were called snowboard parks. And it wasn't really until like 98. I mean, we had early in the freeze days, we had we started a half pipe contest because there wasn't any real the skiers largely were not allowed in half pipes. So we went about trying to change that by creating a half pipe contest and essentially renting out these terrain parks from the resorts for skiers. And that was really when that whole, skiers in the terrain park thing started taking off. Was like the winter of 98, winter of 99. And the extreme skiing thing and skiing in Alaska, skiing big lines in Alaska. I would say those two things were much more of an early to mid 90s thing. So it was out front. And I think, there was one of the really big goals of Freeze Magazine was to make the sport very relatable to young skiers. And there was the whole athlete thing, which is great. But we also we didn't want this to be a magazine that was just about, big lines in Alaska and, backcountry skiing and stuff that 90% of the ski public would never do. So when when we looked at terrain parks, really in the creation of the magazine, like when we're talking about it and before the first issue came out, and we were trying to figure out what we were trying to create and who we were trying to create the magazine for. Terrain, like skiing inbounds, was something that was really important because it was going to be relatable. And then, the most dynamic terrain on every mountain that was inbounds was typically the snowboard park. So we set about making that a terrain park for skiers and snowboarders. And it wasn't easy. There was a lot of pushback. But we got there pretty quickly. I'd say there was like 1 year of transition, and then all of a sudden it was open for everybody after that. I mean, just to back up on timeline stuff. So the summer of the winter of 95, I wrote. I was living in Los Angeles, and I wrote a TV pilot called Generation S, and it was about what was going on in Squaw Valley. And it was basically a reality show. This is even before The Real World came out. But it was during MTV Sports, which was that was the show that everybody our age was watching and that they were into. And it was basically the first action sports television show on TV, MTV Sports. And so I was pitching them on ideas for segments, and then wrote this pilot TV show about Squaw Valley and about Shane and Kent and Brad Holmes and a few others. And that script got in the hands of a company called Times Mirror, which at the time owned LA Times, but they also owned a lot of magazines, including Ski Magazine and Skiing Magazine and Outdoor Life. And they saw it, and they had a very successful ski magazines that anybody under the age of 40 would not be caught dead reading. And so they saw a really good potential for it. And we were talking about how we didn't want anybody over the age of 30 to read the magazine, right? We didn't want any old skiers checking it out. We wanted only young skiers to be kind of part of this whole thing. So it was, kind of a really good match made, and they just greenlit the idea. They kind of bought the rights to it, but I came with it, and with no print experience, no real writing experience outside of my journalism degree, I became the publisher and lead writer of an editor and ads. I was publisher, editor, advertising, sales, event director, because we needed to start events because we needed to bring the magazine to life. And that's why we started the US Freeskiing Open. So I did all that as kind of a one-man band, and then quickly got some people to help me out. That was kind of the humble beginnings of the magazine was a TV script about the Squaw Valley ski scene, and that was the elevator pitch, and that got made because there was a huge hole in skiing. People thought wrongly, but people thought that everybody under the age of 30 or 20 was snowboarding, and everybody over the age of 30 was skiing. When in actuality, there was more skiers on the hill between 12 to 20. That was the age range that we slotted. There were more skiers on the hill, 12 to 20, actually 3 times more skiers, 12 to 20, than there were snowboarders. So that was also that was a helpful stat in getting them freeze off the ground.
Yeah. And so, how old were you at the time when you were pitching that reality show turned
20,
magazine?
20 24, 25. Yeah, 24, 25. And it took about a year to get it all, kind of pitched and done. And we actually had this really super famous and fun consulting group that we put together in Boulder. And it was, essentially the publishers of Ski and Skiing magazine, as well as the lead publisher and the lead marketing director of Transworld Snowboarding and Transworld Skateboarding, all those magazines. We all went to Boulder, and it was up to me to put together a group of skiers and influential people to pitch the idea of a magazine dedicated to this group of skiers and this kind of like youth movement in skiing. So Murray Weiss and Steve Winter from Matchstick Productions came, Seth Morrison came, Wendy Fisher came, Brad Holmes was there, Shane was there, Kent, Shane and Kent were there, my roommates from college. This was their first time back in Boulder in, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. So we had a really, really good group of people, and we sat down and around a table and just started pitching story ideas. And we came up with the first like 2 years of content in one meeting. And we just didn't have a name. We spent a lot of time trying to figure out the name. So it was going to be like extreme skier, but like the word extreme was becoming so taboo. Taco Bell had taken it over, so we knew we couldn't do extreme. We talked about mountain. We were really settled on punk rock skier. That was going to be that was like kind of the pitch. And then all of a sudden we started laying it out, and just didn't work. And Holmes just came up with the word freeze, and it looked really cool because of the E's and the Z, and we went right into all caps, and yeah, it was that became the name of the magazine. Just Holmes literally pulled it out of his ass. But that first focus group in Boulder, which was the summer of '96, we went to print with a magazine less than 3 months later. From like the pitch meeting, a couple of weeks go by of negotiating deals and figuring out budgets and all that stuff. Then it was a green light, and I was living in Los Angeles, and I started driving down to Oceanside to the Transworld headquarters and working with an art director down there, and working with a couple other people at Transworld because I didn't know anything about magazines. And they helped me. And we put the first magazine to bed in November. We kind of started it in late September, put it to bed mid-November, and it came out at Christmas '96. And people didn't really start seeing it until January of '97. But we like Transworld did an amazing job of getting us on a lot of magazine shelves back when those were a thing. and newsstands, and everybody saw it, and we just got like crazy good feedback right off the bat. Not, and I think that magazine, I think the first magazine we ever did was our worst. I know it was. It was definitely our worst. But just people, just the idea of it, and just the fact that we, had a different voice, and we introduced a bunch of new characters, and one of the early things too is I knew I wanted it to be funny. So I knew I wanted it to be like easy, like not big stories, long stories, but I wanted it to be funny, short stuff, and like the best photography in the world of these people. And that's where we concentrated on. So like people kind of saw the germ of that idea, and then we just kept hammering that home, issue after issue after issue. Photos, funny characters, interesting people. Those were the notes we hit every magazine.
Yeah. So you have the green light in terms of the idea. Who supplied the funding, and how much was that for the first issue, and or that first year?
Yeah.
I'm not sure how they broke it up.
Yeah. So we came up with a cost of about $200,000 of what the first issue was going to be, and this included salaries and photography costs, editorial costs. We hired some writers, and then the biggest cost was printing. That was super expensive. That was probably over 100,000 of the 200,000. And Times Mirror, which was the holding company, just bid off on that budget, and that included, me becoming a part-time employee. I never became full-time employee until like 2 years later. Became a part-time employee, and it was about $200,000 that got signed off on by Times Mirror. There was two people that were really influential in that decision. Andy Klerman, who was the publisher of Ski and Skiing magazine, and Brian Selstrom, who was the publisher and part owner of Transworld publications. Those two guys, they were the first to see the script. They were the first to kind of recognize that it could be, a good market for skiing. And then to their credit, they both sat through the focus group, and they both took enough out of that focus group of thinking that there was some good ideas there, and gave us a shot, which was a pretty big gamble on their front, because the 200,000, we actually made money on the first issue. So advertising went really well, because we were just pitching a whole new market. So nobody really wanted to miss out. So all the ski companies were in there, a bunch of resorts were in there, the apparel guys were in there. My first sales call for Freeze was with Oakley, and Pat McIlvaine, who would later become the head of marketing at Oakley for decades, and a woman named Chris Bowers I had the meeting with, and I was living in LA, so I could just drop down there and pitch it to them. And they just, like, I don't know, like not even 5-10 minutes into the pitch, Pat stopped me mid-sentence and said, "We're in, we're in." And he had been trying to figure out, like, he knew Seth because Pat was a Vail guy and Seth was a Vail guy. Before Seth settled in Crested Butte, he grew up in Vail. And so Pat knew all about Seth from being in Vail, and he knew all about Shane as well from being in Vail, because both those guys were just ripping up the mountain and destroying it. And so when Pat got the job at Oakley, he was trying to figure out, he signed those two guys, but he was trying to figure out how to advertise them. And then all of a sudden I came around and gave the pitch, and they were the inside front cover of the first issue, Oakley, with a with a Seth ad, a POV ad, and yeah, that was a match made in heaven. But we were very successful from an advertising standpoint right out of the gate. But then when that kind of got us a little maybe too over our skis, if you will. So we went from 1 issue to 4 issues, and then 4 issues to 5 issues in the first 3 years of Freeze. And so all those printing costs and all those distribution costs, and we really kind of thought that people would find us on the newsstand, and that ended up not being a really good strategy. So we ended up kind of out of the gate, we were essentially break even. Then year 2 and 3, I remember in year 2, we lost like $200,000, which I thought was a ton of money, and I was devastated by it, but nobody seemed to really care at Ski Magazine, which was good. And then year 3, I think we lost $400,000 on like a $1.8 million budget there in year 3. And then year 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we made money on all those years. We started kind of breaking even or making like 50 grand. And then by the end, the profit in 2005, that season, the profit was $250,000 of profit, straight profit. And a lot of that came from the US Free Ski Open, which became profitable. The East Coast Movie Tour, which actually was semi-profitable. Like some of the other marketing stuff that we started doing around the magazine, not just straight advertising. But all those things convinced people to spend more money with us, to instead of taking $10,000 of their $1 million budget and throwing it to Freeze and having shitty creative and, whatever, which we turned down a lot of advertising because we thought it would be, bad for the image, which we were probably right. To then all of a sudden becoming $100,000 and $200,000 clients to these ski companies in our later years. And that's where we really started really cooking big time.
Jeez, that is some big money for somebody that's like 25 to be at the head of all of that.
I don't, it never, the job never felt that big. Like there was a ton of pressure to create a great product, and the pressure on the product. And again, I think the decision early on that we made to try to be funny was like, that's really hard. It's like just being funny is hard. But trying to be funny about skiing is even harder because it's like a niche of a niche. But it puts so much pressure on the product that I think that was like our secret sauce. And because, looking at kick-ass photos and laying them out in a magazine was really easy. Like we knew where all the guys were. We knew what all the photographers wanted their stuff to be in Freeze. All the skiers wanted to be in Freeze. So like the ski stuff in the magazine was really pretty easy. It was the humor and the style and the attitude and the point of view, like the vision, that was really hard. And we spent like hours and hours, a lot of all-nighters getting it right. And that was, but that was only like, the publishing season was only like 6 months. The other 6 months we were out skiing. So like, it was a dream. It was a dream job. It was ridiculous how much fun it was. I had an unlimited expense account. I skied all over the world. I hung out with the most incredible people you could ever find yourself with. And especially when the JF and JP and those guys that when they came onto the scene, and Tanner and Evan Raps when they came on the scene, and CR Johnson when he came on the scene, just spent a lot of time with them. They were all like little brothers to me. And we just, like, it was all Uncle Mike's expense account that made the whole thing go all winter. And it was a dream job. The job, it never seemed like a job until the end. At the end, when I kind of woke up and realized that I kind of needed to have a career. I thought I needed a real career. I definitely needed to make more money than I was making. And so, that was when I was kind of ready to go and make it back in television, because that's where I kind of started my career in television. Sidetracked with Freeze for 10 years, got back into television. But yeah, that 10 years, I wouldn't trade a day. It was a hell of a time.
Yeah. And so you talked about that young talent. It seemed like you guys had built a stage and a platform to receive the sport as it was born. Like there was a couple people who were already in the sport and they're kind of pushing the boundaries, but that first wave of freestyle professional skiers that you mentioned, it seemed like Freeze was the platform that they came up onto and was like, here we are. Is that kind of how it played out?
Yeah, it like, so early on, so one of the first articles was in Freeze magazine, was called The Dirty Dozen, and it was literally just like, the publishers of Ski Magazine said, who are you making this magazine about, right? They couldn't believe that there was a whole side of skiing that they didn't know anything about. And I was like, oh, do you know this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, right? And I started naming off these 10, 12 people, and they knew nothing about them. And I was like, okay, we need to tell some stories about these 12 people. And that was, Shane and Kent and Wendy Fisher and Dave Swanwick and down the list, right? So there was kind of the launch of those 12 people was the original deal. And that was all of people skiing Alaska, skiing the backcountry, all that stuff. Then the second year is when we started to introduce some terrain park stuff. And it was that winter, and that's when we started the US Free Skiing Open as well. And what was happening in skiing then was that this was before the internet. So you had a group of people in New Hampshire, a group of people in Vermont, a group of people in Breckenridge, a group of people in Vail, a group of people in Squaw, in the Pacific Northwest, in Taos. Nobody skied together. They all skied their local resorts. They didn't know that they existed. And then this magazine comes along and tells the stories about all these people around the country. And that was the other thing that we did, is like, Europe, like, we didn't waste our time trying to be a global magazine. We wanted to be a magazine for North America. Like, even skiers in Whistler and skiers in Jackson Hole never skied together, right? It was just so rare. And so all these tribes started to learn about each other. And that's when they all came up. Like, the best skier in Montana was Tanner Hall as a 14-year-old. The guys killing it in Squaw Valley, which had the biggest scene, Shane and Kent and all those guys out there, the Gaffneys, all that stuff, that came out. But they had never really, known about Tanner, and Tanner didn't know about them. But everybody came to the US Free Skiing Open, including the Canadians. And it was the first time that those Canadians had ever skied with Americans, like JP, JF, Douglas, Vinny, Falou, the three Phils. Those guys had never, until they came to the US Free Skiing Open, they had seen stuff in the magazine, Freeze magazine. They'd seen pictures, but they'd never seen anything in person until they started showing up at the US Freestyle Open in 1998 and 1999. And then the biggest one was 2000, when like all the tribes came together. And that was, would it have happened eventually once the internet came about 4 or 5 years later? Of course, but it didn't exist. And so it happened through the magazine and through the US Freestyle Open. All those people coming together, and it was every resort's best skier suddenly realizing that they weren't the best skier in the world, but then wanting to become the best skier in the world, and pushing each other. And that all kind of created this wonderful, perfect storm of ski progression.
That is awesome. That was the most concise kind of summary of it that I've ever heard, because it makes perfect sense that that's the way it was. You know, there was no way to connect with someone East Coast, West Coast. How are you going to know about each other? So that makes perfect
Yep.
sense, and I've never heard that before. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
it was cool. Like, the ironic thing is that the internet killed Freeze, right? We had we had this online forum. We got bought by AOL. So Times Mirror got bought by Time Inc. Time Inc. got bought by AOL, right? This all happened over the course of like 4 years. And Freeze was a very, very small part of that. But we went with each transaction. So we were eventually owned by AOL. Before that, like 99, 2000, 2001, we had the Freeze forum, and it was literally, like a WordPress chat room, and all these kids started talking to each other, and it was like we created this wonderful community, right? And so we had the magazine, we had the events, we had some other marketing programs, we had movie tours, and we had this like chat room where there was thousands of kids talking shit on each other every day. And the new schoolers guys, who used to be the High Cascade posse, and then High Cascade said they couldn't use their name, so they became the Midwest All-Stars. Those are the original Midwest kids, right, that started new schoolers. They actually were in the Freeze chat room, representing themselves as the High Cascade posse, and and were some of our biggest posters. Then AOL they didn't buy us, they bought Time magazine, they bought People, they bought all these huge magazines that we were a small part of. And AOL says across the entire company, you have to authenticate yourself in order to post anything. And so we lost our entire community overnight. And those guys like Rogue and Schmuck and all those guys up there in the Midwest started new schoolers chat room, where you didn't have to authenticate yourself. You could have fake accounts. You could do and the other thing is that you couldn't be under the age of 16 to post anything in a chat room. So that was like 2/3 of our audience. So we lost our online presence overnight off of one corporate decision, and we never got it back. And to be honest, that's the eventual downfall of Freeze magazine, because we lost our online community, and subscriptions weren't great. But we were profitable, but our subscriptions in the grand scheme of things weren't great. And that was when they decided to pull the plug. And obviously, if we were able to transition to a really healthy online community, we were perfect for it. We would have crushed it and dominated, but couldn't react fast enough from that decision that AOL made.
Yeah. Well, so that's the life cycle of freeze. But what I want to talk
Yeah.
about is the events because they were just so iconic, and the two in particular are the U.S. Free Skiing Open and Parkasaurus, whatever the hell that was. So, yeah, let's start with the Free Skiing Open.
So the Freestyle Open was like, we had this magazine. It had such a voice. Um, we had all these people involved, and as I said, there was all these tribes that didn't know each other existed, except through freeze. So we wanted to bring them together, and that was, and there was no slope style contests, no big air contests, and no skier cross contests, right? So snowboarding was in the X Games, skiing was not in the X Games. Modified shovel racing was in the X Games, skiing was not. So we, instead of arguing with ESPN, when I had some friends there, so I used to kill them on this all the time. We started our own event, U.S. Free Skiing Open, in January 1998, and it was a 3-hit slopestyle course with no rails, essentially 3 mogul jumps in the middle with all flat landings. It was a horrible course. And JF won that, and JP won the big air, which was literally just like one jump, the final jump at the slopestyle course. And JP won the big air, and really just, word got out that, grabbing skis and land and switch was like a big thing. And then we got a huge push the summer of '98. The X Games down in San Diego had this summer jump, this ramp that they built with chipped ice. And I had been bugging those guys forever. And I said, look, and I finally had the tape, right? I had the VHS tape of the US Free Skiing Open in 1998. Said, these guys are going to come down, they're going to make your snowboarders look laughable. And so they're like, okay, they can come down and hit the jump, but we're not televising it. It's a test event. And sure enough, Zox and JP and JF and Vinny crushed that jump. Evan Rapps had some amazing jumps as well, and blew the minds of the X Games. So then the winter of '99 X Games allowed skier cross, and then the winter of 2000 is when they finally got to their senses and did big air. But it was really the U.S. Free Skiing Open that started those contests, and what really became, so the initial thing was to bring the tribes together, which was great, but then it just became about progression, and the big air contest in particular, which we eventually put on the bottom of Lion's Head, or a bottom of Larkspur, Gold Peak, main traffic area of Vail. And we wanted, when we selected Vail for the first one, and we were there for 6 years, we wanted to throw an event at the biggest, most successful resort in America, which was Vail, the biggest brand name, because it would give us instant credibility. And that was a great decision. That was like, looking back on it, that really, really helped the entire free skiing movement. The fact that we had this big event in Vail, and the X Games was on this piddly little hill in Snow Summit, Los Angeles, So, our event was instantly better than theirs, even though they were 100 times more funded. But it just, and the Open, because of the time of year, we wanted to do it in mid to late January. And because of the fact that it was an open contest, anybody could enter. All the best skiers at every mountain came out to Vail to throw it down, and they all became way better that week, right? As they were all next to each other and pushing each other, and that's where we got the first switch landings. That's where Falou did switch back. That's where Yoon landed a 900. That's where Andy Woods landed a 1260. It's where Johnny Mosley originally did the dinner roll a year before he did it in the Olympics. He debuted it at the U.S. Free Skiing Open. So it became this place and this time for only skiers to come together and progress the sport. And you could go from nobody knew who you are, like TJ Schiller, to being one of the most popular and financially successful pros overnight. All the ski companies came and they signed kids all week to contracts. And that was really what really fueled everything, right? It was a place where you could make a name for yourself, and you could become a pro skier overnight. And that was a lot of incentive for everybody to come. And we were on television, and we had a whole magazine that we could tell the story of the Open about. And I was surprised that nobody else really made a run at us. But nobody else made a run at us. We had this wonderful spot of being the biggest and best skiing only event in the world. And yeah, it was awesome event. And it lived on past freeze by I think 5 or 6 years. But really when there was the magazine and the event and the athletes and the athlete connection, we were firing on all cylinders. We had to talk athletes into coming. Like a lot of Tanner and Simon and Yoon and those guys who came to the first ones because they needed to be discovered, didn't want to keep coming to the Open, right? Because it was really, really, really difficult to win because of all the kids that were there, and the format was really challenging. You had to throw down a run several times to win. And they didn't want to come, and we basically told them how important this was to have a skiing only event. That go to the X Games, go to the Gravity Games. We're not telling you not to, but you have to go to the event that started it all. And that really helped us. It was really, the event was the athletes. And once they got there, and once they all, felt the pressure to really progress the sport and to really throw down, that helped the whole deal, of course. But yeah, it was really all about that, gathering everybody together for a skiing only event. And that was what was special about it. Different than the X Games, different than everything else.
Yeah. And that obviously makes great content for the magazine. Was it televised at all?
Yeah, the first one, we had a highlight clip on a show that was in syndication called The Extremists. Second year we got on Fox Sports Net in syndication. Third year was a huge swing. So this is an interesting story here. Bear with me on this one. So third year we go in, and I wanted to put it, I had a TV background, so, I could call people and talk TV with them. And so it was really important for me to be on ESPN. They were they still are kingmakers in sports television. They were kingmakers in sports television back then. So I'm like, I want to be on ESPN. I cut this deal to be on ESPN2 on a Saturday at 4 p.m. Great time slot. It's going to crush. It's going to be great. And so we have it all set up. And sure, I get the distribution deal in place. And then I land a huge sponsorship. Title sponsor of the U.S. Free Skiing Open. The biggest sponsor we ever had, and the largest financial investment we've ever had. And they had ads in the magazine. They were on the East Coast Movie Tour with us. They were the U.S. Free Skiing Open title sponsor, huge sponsor, 6-figure commitment to us more money than we'd ever seen from any single sponsor. Lifestyles condoms. And it's a perfect sponsor for a teenage male ski magazine. Like in the late 90s, like sexually active kids should have condoms. And so we had a ton of sexually active kids. And so it's a perfect sponsor. And I had submitted my sponsor list to ESPN. They clearly didn't look at it. We had banners all over the hill with Lifestyles condoms. We had a 35-foot condom on the jump hill. And you can imagine what that looked like. The Vail homeowners freaked out and made us take it down. And so we cut the show. It's the greatest show in the history of skiing. I have it in the basement with all the magazines, and it never saw the light of day. ESPN wouldn't put it on the air because of all the condoms. This is one they had just gotten bought by Disney, so they were like, "We can't do it. Sorry, Mike." And it was the hardest, absolutely the hardest, most difficult thing that's ever happened to me in my career was that show, that sponsorship, that event, which was the Faloo switchback. It never saw the light of day. We ended up cutting it up and sending it to all these different highlight shows and things like that. And it was on Real Thrills with Glenn Flake, but like it would have been perfect. The next year we got on TBS, which was great. We had a huge audience for that, largest audience for a ski only show up to that point. And then eventually got back on ESPN and, also on Fox. And we also did an hour on CBS one year. So on the network. So yeah, it was always, television was always important to it. And it was always kind of, again, I wanted to show the world what was going on. We were always kind of ebbing the whole, like, are we just talking to ourselves, or like, are we bringing people into the sport, or are we just like completely stoking out everybody that's already in the sport and we're just talking to ourselves? And that was always what we would challenge ourselves with. So, easy way to do that was television.
Wow. Yeah, I think I definitely wonder that at times too with the podcast. Like, am I just talking to skiers? And I think the answer is overwhelmingly yes. No one is going to listen to a 2-hour podcast about a very specific topic within a very specific sport. But yeah, that is incredible.
There was this trend list that came out in I think it was 99 or 2000, and like we were on it. Like Freeze magazine was on this like trend, like hottest trends in America list. I have a friend of a friend who was a producer on Real World, and he gave a bunch of Freeze magazine shirts to cast members. So it's like season 5. It's like the one after New York. It's the San Francisco one. We were definitely like creeping into pop culture every now and then. We never made a huge breakthrough, but it was very important to us to make skiing relevant to the pop culture of teenagers in the late 90s and early 2000s. Like, we didn't want to just be a jock ski magazine. We were trying to be a pop culture magazine. We took a lot of we read Big Brother, and we loved it. We were all the Laddie mags, Maxim and stuff, and those magazines. We devoured those and took a lot of ideas from that. So we really wanted to break through into pop culture with the sport. because we were being dominated by snowboarding at the time. And we succeeded there. Like we definitely like snowboarding was going like this, skiing was going like this, and kind of popularity and youth movement. And then all of a sudden, boom! It didn't take us long. We got right up with snowboarding within a 3-4 years.
Yeah. It's a bummer because nothing broke through quite like skateboarding did. Skateboarding,
Yeah,
you even see people walking around today with Thrasher hoodies on, and they've probably never read
yeah,
Thrasher magazine in their life. I grew
yeah,
up on all the MTV shows with Bam Margera and like just everything.
yeah,
Skateboarding really broke into the culture, and it's funny to imagine a different universe where skiing broke in
yeah. We would
just
have.
that hard.
Yeah, it was challenging. I think what we really leaned into was that um, we could create an image through not just our magazine, but like through all the ski companies. Like they all changed their graphics, and their graphics got cooler. Um, all the apparel companies, like a bunch of snowboarding companies, started outfitting skiers, or apparel companies changed their styles and their colors to be more relevant. And this was what we pushed all this stuff really, really hard. And so you would we didn't push it. You wouldn't see people walking down the street with a K2 shirt. Like they would definitely be a skier, right? Like, but where all this product sales, where it all started blowing up, the all mountain ski was essentially a derivative of the twin tip. And now it's now most skis have two tips, are twin tipped, right? Rocker technology, came from essentially jib skis too. And Shane kind of understanding the dynamics of how to change ski design, based off of his experimentation in Alaska. And like we're like, as a community, and the tie between the athletes and the magazine was so tight. We talked, we all the time. We traveled the world together. All we did was talk about skiing. We were probably incredibly boring people, but um, uh, like it was such a concentration of trying to progress and trying to push our version of the sport into the mainstream, and not sacrificing anything with that, right? Like we wouldn't cheese it up to do that. We just wanted to break through with what we thought was really, really compelling content and people. And I think we did that. I think, when people say, you start out the podcast as saying like, you talk to people and they say, I remember this in freeze, or I read this in freeze and it changed me, or like, I suddenly, through Freeze magazine, I realized that there was this whole thing going on in skiing that I wanted to be part of. That was all on purpose, man. I mean, we wanted that to happen. And that is the best thing about Freeze, is that, that all happened, and that whole generation of skiers, really set the table for everything that's going on today, and why people buy fat skis, why people wear certain clothing, where they ski, why there are terrain parks on the mountains, why the size of the terrain parks are so big, all that stuff. We pushed hard, not Freeze, but like Freeze and the athletes together, because we really did it all together. We were very, very, very integrated on the whole thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's inspiring. And so the other event that I mentioned, and it's the one that I love
Yeah.
coming across when I'm digitizing these magazine. What was up with Parkasaurus? It's just like the best event ever, built for photo shoots, pretty much. So what was your involvement with that? I don't even know if that's something that you guys spearheaded, but it was certainly,
Oh no, yeah, we started that whole thing.
yeah.
So similar to the U.S. Free Skiing Open, um, we only got these kids for 4 days, right? Like everybody came together for 3 or 4 days, and it was a competition. So everybody's kind of hiding their runs. There really wasn't anything to shoot in practice, right? Um, and then because the X Games came the next week, everybody was gone. So we needed a chance to get everybody together on snow in a mellow environment, to where we could get a lot of really really good photography. So that was, we needed that. We knew we needed that. Uh, Snowboard magazine had Super Park, and then and Transworld Snowboarding had something else like something Park, right? And so we're like, all right, what should we name ours? Like Super Duper Park, or like, Great Park? And we were just kind of like, again, just like where we came up with Freeze magazine, we came up with the name Freeze, just totally random. Um, and there was like this thing going around at the time where like if something was big, you would put a saurus on the back of it, right? Like that was a lexicon thing in the lexicon at the time, right? So yeah, it's like, okay, Parkasaurus, killer, great name. And we needed a theme anyways, because our art director always wanted themes. So Parkasaurus was literally just a park shoot, an opportunity for people to get together in a casual environment to create great photography. And we had every single resort wanted to host us, which was really cool. Um, and we took the first one to Snow Summit, and we did that. We could have had the choice of any mountain. We went to Snow Summit because that was the epicenter of park snowboarding at the time. Gunny Gunnarsson, was a young cat driver at the time at Snow Summit, and he built the best terrain features in the world. And he was hired by every single event around the world to create terrain features. And so I called him up and I was like, we're coming there. You're hosting us. I'm bringing the best. And, we want you to build the best. And that was another thing too, is like a lot of resorts would build these features for snowboarders, like for the Forum team or for the Burton team, and only 4 or 5 guys and girls would get to session it, and then they would tear it down because those snowboarders didn't want anybody else to like get similar photography, and they didn't want the skiers to go higher because skiers go higher. So we went out to Snow Summit, and they built a custom park for us, and we spent a week there shooting. And again, same thing, like once all those athletes are together, once they're pushing each other, and the photographers are there, and there's a huge competition amongst the photographers to get a shot that nobody else is getting, get a land, when Tanner lands this trick, or when Falou nails this rail, or when LaRose gets boosts out of the pipe 20 feet for the first time in the history of the sport. There was a lot of kind of competition to get that shot. And so we knew if we just put all the athletes and all the photographers together with a great terrain park, we would get great content. And we did. And yeah, Parkasaurus was what we named it. The first year we just named it that. Like, I think it was year 3 that we had like this 50-foot inflatable Tyrannosaurus Rex, where people were sessioning these side hits over it. We had it was right when Jurassic Park came out, so we actually got like from LA, because we were near LA. We got one of the inflatables that they used as a background in Jurassic Park. That was the actual inflatable that we got for Parkasaurus. So we kind of played on the theme a bunch too, but yeah, it was, again, real simple stuff. Who are the best skiers? Let's take him to the best terrain park in the country, pair him up with the best photographers. The rest was pretty easy.
Yeah,
Don't
perfect
miss the
combo right
shot, guys. Yeah, don't miss the shot. And we got great stuff there. And the other thing too is we invited all the film companies, and that was something that the other park shoots in snowboarding and even Powder like invited some skiers to Super Park because they were owned by the same company as Snowboarder Magazine. We invited all the film companies because we wanted all the content to be out there. And we kind of did that for the first time. Most of those things were always exclusive to a single film company, but we brought them all because we wanted the content to be everywhere.
Wow. That's incredible. I think, yeah, you definitely see a lot of the same thing with like I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but like the Nines competition now in Switzerland, where
Yeah,
they just build the
very
best
familiar.
park possible. Yeah, and
Yeah,
so hard.
I think we had similar goals as the Nines competition for sure. But yeah, uh, we wanted to put our spin on it, right? And our spin was, kind of make fun of it, kind of be funny. And that's what the name was. Have an inflatable dinosaur for no reason other than to try to be funny. And then get everybody together. And it was a time for us to really kind of we would put out the invites and then we would inevitably get phone calls into the office like, hey, I'm skiing with this kid. You got to invite him. He's crushing it here and, wherever. And that's how we found a lot of new guys too. And we were always on the look for new guys, is through Parkasaurus and people inviting their ski buddies to it.
Yeah, I think you're breaking the heart of a lot of the photographers today, talking about staff positions, and you get,
Yeah.
you're getting to go to the best park shoots ever, and it's just one thing after another. Like I think the industry's definitely changed a lot on on
Yeah.
the media side for sure.
Yeah. We had pretty good editorial budgets, several $100,000 a year in editorial budgets, that again just went into the creation of great content. And that didn't exist before, right? Like ski magazine stories were like two skiers and a writer and a photographer like traveling to Chamonix and staging pictures, right? Like not creating compelling content, like staging pictures and talking about all the reasons why you should go to Chamonix or Val d'Isère or whatever, right? We put our money into like, hey, Chris O'Connell, hey, Flip McCrarick, hey, Nate Abbott, like these really talented young photographers. Here's a bunch of money. Go grab 5 or 6 skiers and go somewhere and create the best content you possibly can and progress the sport. And there was a lot of pressure to do that. And that money all paid off. And like we had stuff in the magazine. We had more first descents in Freeze magazine than every other ski magazine times 100. We had more first tricks than any ski magazine times 1,000. We like every issue, once you got to the editorial, once you got past the humor stuff, once you get to the pictures and to the editorial, like it was documenting the progression of the sport. It wasn't documenting places to go, things to see, meals to have, none of that bullshit that was all about ski magazines at the time and kind of still is. It was about like progression, cutting edge content, never seen, never done before stuff. That was what the hallmark was.
That's awesome. So what was the call like when it finally got canned and the party was over? Did you see it coming from a mile away, or did it take you by surprise?
So we were having some problems just with new ownership and new leadership. So, when we got bought by AOL, then AOL Time Warner split up, and we went with Time Inc. Um, and they were, this 200-year-old magazine company, and there was a lot of pressure on the stock, from the stockholders, and from the stock, to really kind of cut and become more profitable, and just do what you do well, and don't get involved in all these other things, right? And youth magazines was another thing, that's for sure. Like, it wasn't in their core business model. So there was a lot of pressure from Time Inc. Down, not to Freeze magazine, but just to any business that wasn't, had a 20% margin, and and had, X number of subscribers, right? There was like this big kind of pressure down. And I knew we didn't meet a lot of our magazines at Transworld. And this time I'd been promoted to running non-endemic sales and marketing at Transworld. And Micah Abrams was running Freeze magazine day to day. And so, I was protecting them, but I had kind of been promoted into this corporate level. So I knew what was happening. And then also I just kind of figured I needed a new job, and I wanted to go back to television. So I was interviewing, and I had an offer to go. I went on the East Coast movie tour. I interviewed in New York City for a couple television jobs. And by the time I got home, I had 2 offers to move to New York City and to take jobs back in television. And literally was gonna, like, kind of take the week to figure out the best way to set everything up for Freeze, and to make sure that it didn't get cut, and to make sure, like, I was gonna stick around, not take these jobs right away, but stick around to try to create a soft landing for Freeze. And yeah, just that didn't happen. I walked in Monday morning, and they were like, "Hey, we're making some changes." I actually got fired from Transworld, which was kind of fun. But like, again, it was devastating to me that Freeze couldn't continue on. And I knew that they weren't going to let anybody else take over. Like, they weren't going to sell it. They weren't going to do anything, because they wanted all the subscribers to fold into Skiing magazine, and they wanted all the advertisers just to up their advertising in Skiing magazine or Transworld snowboarding, right? They had, like, landing spots for all the money. They thought they did not anticipate that the industry would be so upset with them that many of them would boycott skiing and snowboarding, which made me feel good. But anyways, they made a call, and just were looking at numbers, and really weren't looking at anything besides subscriber numbers in a spreadsheet. That was what they made their entire decision on. And it was, super unfortunate, but I got fired, but I had this job offer, and so I got a year's worth of severance from Transworld, and I started the next week on a new job. So I had 2 paychecks for a year. So it was fine for me. And that like, and again, not to sound like crass about it, but it was just like, my world transitioned on a dime so quickly that I didn't process in the moment that whole thing, right? Like, I was like, okay, these guys don't want me. These guys want me. I'm gone. And, I would really like to try to help a transition here, because I'm really big into legacy. It's really important to me. The legacy of Freeze, and just the legacy of, like, anything I've done in my career is really important. I've done 4 startups. I've done, a lot of different projects. There's a 20, college sports television, which is now CBS Sports Network. I was on that startup team. Like these things are really legacy and doing things that are that stand the test of time, even if they're not still around, important to me. Um, but like everything happened so fast, and everything was so crazy, and I was engaged to be married, and just it was just nuts. And yeah, I lived probably 5 years of lifetime in 5 months. It was super stressful. But like I never was given the opportunity to really process it that well when it happened. And it took me years to kind of get over it. It took me a long, like I might not be over it now, but it definitely took me years to kind of recover from it.
Yeah, that's very, very intense to have it kind of all end all at once.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's for the better rather than a long drawn out death. Just, rip
I
off the
look,
band-aid
if I
and
was still running Freeze magazine right now, yeah, it would be a bad deal for me.
yeah.
And all that stuff. So, everything works out for a reason. But again, like, I think Freeze as an online publication, and the US Free Skiing Open as an event, and the that part of the sport, with investment from the industry to continue to create heroes that are relatable to young skiers. It's really important. It's happening kind of despite itself, like, it's happening in pockets. And, I can say that, I would do it this way, or I would do it that way. But, to be honest, it's, I think the sport's in pretty good shape now, with young skiers. But, if Freeze was around, I think it'd be better off.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow, so that's the complete cycle of Freeze. So if you want to give from maybe we can give an abbreviated summary of what you've been up to since then, kind of however many years it's been, 15 years, 20 years.
Yeah. So we published our last magazine in 2005. So it's been what, 17 years
Yeah,
since then?
17 years.
Wow. I never really kind of did the math on that until now. I mean, it was a whirlwind. I moved right to New York City and started working for a startup, College Sports Television, and did a lot of what I did at Freeze, of just like creating events and creating sponsorship opportunities and doing things in the college space that ESPN wasn't, because ESPN was dominant and we were a startup. So really just kind of figuring things out in the college space, and then we got bought by CBS Sports, and I went, and they kind of elevated me up to be head of sales of that cable network, and got to really progress my career, and did really well, and really enjoyed that. And I had at Freeze I never had more than 4 employees. And even when I got promoted at Transworld, I think I went from 4 people that reported me at Freeze to 6 at Transworld, right? But at this cable network, I had 22 people on a team, and we had a great time, and it was a great job for me, and I loved working in New York City, and I kind of saw myself being there for the rest of my career. But then just got a call from a headhunter one day and was like, I can't believe you exist. You have big media experience at CBS. You have sponsorship experience. You have really good connections to brands and to companies and to advertisers. And you have a ski background, lifelong ski background. And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's me. And they said, well, we got a job for you at the US ski team. And I was like, and I knew the organization. I mean, I was competed in the sport, and had gone to the 2002 games with a Freeze magazine credential, and had was a big fan of and knew a bunch of people on the team, and had also been working behind the scenes on trying to get free skiing in the Olympics, on some various committees and doing some consulting work from New York City. But I didn't think they had a job for me. But I went out to Park City and interviewed, and sounded good, and then just the realization that I had that I could raise my, I had 3 very young kids at the time, one that was like months old, and I was raised in a ski town in Sun Valley, and if I can raise my kids in a ski town, I knew how special that was, and so yeah, did it, and left an amazing career working with amazing people in New York City in a television business that I love and that I know really well. And there's a lot of times that I miss the hustle, and I miss that whole thing. But when I get to go grab a couple runs on the mountain in the morning, and I'm in my desk at 10 or 11, or I'm able to go on a mountain bike ride after this interview, and just living in the mountains is just can't be replaced. So it was the right decision for me. And I came out here and I had a really, really successful run with the US ski team, and grew that business higher than it had ever been grown and ever, and had some of the most successful revenue years in the history of the organization, and got to host the 2015 Alpine World Championships in Vail, and did this incredible television deal with NBC for that, and kind of made a lot of great changes there that still exist today. So back to the legacy thing. But like I have a 6 to 8 year life cycle. Freelance television for 4 years, Freeze magazine for 7 years, television business in New York City between CSTV and CBS 7.5 years, US ski and snowboard for 6.5 years. Now I've been doing this business for 5 years, so a year and a half from now I'll probably change again. But yeah, it was just time for me to change at the ski team and go off on my own and be my own boss. That was really the biggest thing, because I've been blessed with having a lot of really, really great mentors and bosses, but I've also had a couple really bad ones. And my time at the ski, I got hired by one of the best bosses I ever had, Bill Moralt, and then I left when I had one of the worst bosses I ever had. So it was good timing to leave, and it's been great. I don't regret it at all. And you get to live in Park City and still be involved in a bunch of different sports and sports marketing, and do some things in the ski industry, but for the most part, kind of being out of the ski industry is nice too.
Yeah.
There's more. I can tell you, it's easier to pay the mortgage when you're outside the ski industry.
That is the overwhelming sentiment from nearly every single guest on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. So that covers everything. What should we leave it off on? What would you like to see for the future of skiing?
I'd say, like, again, I think that the sport of skiing is in a great place. Look, climate change is a horrible thing for the sport. And we had a winter out here in Park City that wasn't that great from a powder perspective. But I'm hoping that things like that are cyclical, and maybe we're not skiing in November, but we're skiing in May. Some of the best powder you're going to get is in April and May, not February. Like, these are the changes that are coming. So, but like, in terms of the experience and the package of what it offers as a recreation and as a lifestyle and as a passion and as a sport, it's got everything that you would ever want. So, and I think what we saw during COVID with all the pass sales and all the people visiting and all that stuff, it's great for everybody involved in this that's making a living off the sport. Yeah, I think the industry, certainly there's room for improvement, right? And I think the industry as a whole is getting lazy in their marketing. They are, doing search, and they're putting and they're doing, just really simple, basic, digital advertising, or everybody's saying content creation, but they're running the same formulas, and nobody's really doing anything out of the box or progressing things. And the media side of the business is not working really closely with the manufacturers, like used to be when back in our day, right? The whole business was built on relationships, and I think people committing 100% of their marketing budgets to really simple, out of the box digital impressions because it performs, to whatever metric they're targeting, which is probably a wrong metric. I just think that that's dangerous. But I mean, everybody's selling skis, so it seems to be working. I think I would say that athletes are also not as pro skiers, pro athletes are not as cultivated and supported as much as they were and as much as they should be. That would be something that I would definitely like to see come back a little bit more of the manufacturers supporting athletes a little bit better, and then the industry kind of rallying around some of those achievements that they're able to pull off. Something like Chris Davenport skiing every 14er in Colorado is amazing and should be talked about by everybody, type of thing, and you just feel like some of the stuff just doesn't get the proper amount of coverage and credit that it could or should. But again, kind of nitpicky, because I do think that the industry is in a great place, and people from big cities want to spend tens of thousands of dollars on a ski vacation still, probably more than ever. And people with a lot of money from the cities want to buy real estate in these ski towns. And some of that stuff culturally is going to be a challenge, but overall it's, I'm not one that's ever complained about people going skiing. I can't. My mom was the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Ketchum-Sun Valley, so it was like her job to convince people to take ski vacations in Sun Valley, right? So it's my DNA to encourage every single person in the world to go out skiing as often as you can. So you're not going to ever get me complaining about crowds and about ski culture and mountain town culture and all this stuff, even though it's very different, and maybe not for the better in some places. But overall, sport is great. The technology is fantastic. I enjoy it now as much as I ever have in my life. And I ski now more than I ever have in my life, including when I was a kid. So, it's all good in my opinion.
Well, there you have it.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you very much for coming on today. This was a pleasure talking to you. Super insightful, and I'm glad we could get it done.
Yeah, it was a fun walk down memory lane. And again, anybody out there who's listening, that hopefully they'll be able to see some of these Freeze magazines in their digital splendor, courtesy of your website. So yeah, there's a lot of stories behind every one of those magazines that we weren't able to share, but it's always fun to kind of talk about that run that we had with Freeze, because it was a fantastic one.
Awesome.
All right, that was our episode with Mike Jaquet. Very thankful that we can get him on the show. Mike wanted me to throw this in at the end. They are selling merch with the original Freeze logo on it at freezemerch.com. All the proceeds go to the foundations for Shane, JP, CR, and Sarah. So if you'd like to check that out, go to freezemerch.com.